Hey guys, back again with another video, review on Metroid Fusion for the GBA. And the Metroid series, I talked about this in my Metroid 2 review, but it's a series I've been wanting to get into more. It's a series I've come to enjoy more and more the more games I play. And Metroid Fusion is a game that I did play a long time ago, but I had forgotten most of it, and I don't think I actually even finished it. And I kind of wanted to do like a Metroid series review, so I have to play all the games. I still haven't played Zero Mission, Metroid Prime 3, or Other M. I know Other M gets a lot of shit. That's going to be an interesting game whenever I get to that. But Metroid Fusion, I haven't played it, and it's been a while since I played it. I wanted to get a better feel for it for when I do my series review, and I thought I would just review it. It's not too long of a game. It didn't take me too long to get through. I played it on the Wii U, on the Virtual Console. You can get it there. Obviously, you can also play on the Game Boy Advance. And where shall we start with Metroid Fusion? I guess overall I enjoyed it. I think it's a good game. It's one of those games that's pretty divisive as far as the Metroid series goes. Not as divisive as the Metroid Other M, although actually I don't even think that game's really divisive. I think most people hate that game, but there's a lot of people that don't like Metroid Fusion, mostly due to the linear structure that it has. And I can talk about that with story and gameplay, because the story kind of ties into that, and I guess that's where we'll start. Samus basically gets infected with like this parasite. They call it the X parasite, and after that, basically she gets sent to this kind of laboratory space station to kind of investigate an explosion. And this X parasite kind of virus has kind of like taken over this facility, and you're kind of immune to it. So obviously you're a good person to send to this place, and that's kind of the main story. And this game actually has a pretty heavy focus on narrative, which is different for the series. And this is one of those things that divides a lot of people. Basically, there's a computer that will actually give you objectives as you're exploring this space station, and you get constant dialogue scenes whenever you enter these navigation rooms. And you get your objective. There's a lot of exposition in this game, and you're constantly interrupted by dialogue. And you even get some like little cutscenes where, like, sometimes when Samus is going like up and down an elevator, she'll like have her thoughts and feelings like kind of like shown to you during like these cutscenes, which is interesting. So this kind of format that the game has, it's what divides people, because it makes the game more linear than previous games in the series. There's still a pretty good exploration component to this game, but the space station itself is kind of divided into different sectors. And there's kind of like a hub, which is like the main deck of the ship. And each of these sectors have like kind of different environments, different biomes basically. So you kind of have your lava area, your water area, your ice area, your kind of cavern area. But you're basically traveling from sector to sector, and they're kind of defined in that way. And for the most of the game, you're traveling through these areas by taking the elevators. And the objectives that you get are going to make you get a certain ability, or activate a certain door, or unlock certain doors. There's certain doors that are color-coded and have like different security clearances. And you've got like these very guided objectives, and a lot of the time it will actually highlight on the map where you need to go. And later in the game, they actually they give you a bit more freedom, where they don't explicitly tell you where your objective is. You kind of got to explore the environments. But the backtracking in this game is, for the most part, non-existent. There are times where you can backtrack to previous sectors with like your new abilities and find hidden energy tanks and things like that. But most of the backtracking in the actual like main story of the game has you going back to previous sectors with your old abilities, and then finding new areas of those sectors that you couldn't access before, and then you're kind of guided through them to your next objective. So it still has a lot of like the exploration of the older Metroid games, but a lot of it is kind of optional, and you have to kind of take it upon yourself to kind of explore previous areas. But at the same time, it's definitely a far more linear experience, and it's different. I don't think it's actually bad. I think it actually kind of works with what they tried to achieve with this game, and I think it works well with the narrative they were trying to tell. But it's you know, it's a change, and it's, you know, it's a preference thing. Some people, I can understand why some people just did not care for this. The atmosphere, for instance, is really lacking in this, because you have like this computer that you're constantly talking to, and the space station just doesn't give you those same vibes that the environments in Super Metroid gave you, for instance, or even actually Metroid Prime, to be honest. So yeah, the story is you know, it's not great. I'll be honest, I wasn't totally invested, but there are some interesting plot points that happen, but there are some negative points to it. Like, I do find that the game interrupts you way too often with dialogue, often when I just wanted to kind of explore and play the game. And you know, the guiding and hand-holding, I think it does get to be a little much at times, especially towards the end, where they have like really heavy plot dumps thrown at you. I feel like the linear structure of this game compared to previous Metroid games kind of fits better on the Game Boy Advance, and I think this is one of the big reasons why they went with this kind of structure, because when you put the game down and come back to it, you're generally going to know where you need to go, which I can't really say for any other Metroid game. It's a good pick up and play game in that way. The save points are fairly generous. Some are a little annoying, but they're fairly generous, and I think they fit with you know, the portable nature of the game. Even though obviously I was playing it on a console, but I do feel like that's why they went with the structure, the linear objective-based structure of this game, because it was on a portable. But of course, Zero Mission, I think, does not have any of this, and maybe the development of that was kind of in response to some of the backlash that this game had. Though this game got amazing reviews when it came out, like it got 9s and 10s, like critical acclaim, really. But yeah, the story, you know, there's more of a focus on it, but I can't say it was all that interesting to me, and I do prefer, I think, when the Metroid series doesn't focus so heavily on this. But it wasn't like a deal breaker for me, like it is for some people. But talking about the gameplay, I think I'll go with like a kind of a pros and cons approach here, because you know, there are some things that really pissed me off about this game as far as the gameplay goes, and we'll get to those. But I want to start positive with this review. And first off, I'll mention like the abilities in this game. I think the power progression in this game is pretty satisfying. Some of the late abilities really make you feel powerful, and going throughout these like old environments you've been to before with your newfound abilities is a joy, like it is in previous Metroid games. There's some really cool like standard power-ups, like the beam weapons that you get later in the game are really satisfying and fun to use. The level design in this game, you know, despite being linear, is still fairly good. I don't think any of it particularly stands out as like amazing, and there's only like a few annoying parts of the game. Like there's this one water area where like there was a bunch of walls that you had to morph ball through that didn't look like you could morph ball through them, and there was a lot of like dead ends, and just, I don't know, it was just kind of annoying to navigate this one water area that you kind of revisit later in the game. But generally the level design is solid. It definitely is enjoyable. I really like the moment level design and environment design. I quite enjoyed. Like I said before, you won't get lost playing this game like in a lot of Metroid games. I did have to use a guide a few times, and it's always that kind of stupid shit where it's like, you know, a wall that doesn't look like you could blow it up, or, you know, a wall that doesn't look like you can morph ball through, like those kinds of instances, which seem to be in every Metroid game I've played, so I can't really hold it against this game that much. The mechanics in this game, I think, are much better than the previous 2D Metroid game in the series, which was Super Metroid. You can now climb and kind of hold on to ledges, which I think is a great addition. The play control is it's less stiff than in Super Metroid. I think there's a better sense of speed in this game, and I think like I said, the abilities are fun to use and pull off. The aiming is a little wonky. You can hold the left trigger to kind of like aim diagonals, or you can kind of like press the D-pad or the analog stick in a diagonal direction, but that can be iffy. It's actually quite hard to hit diagonal targets in this game. But Super Metroid was kind of the same as well. I found it kind of hard to do in that game as well. So that was definitely a little iffy. You hold R and then press the B button to use your missiles, which that was fine. You press down to use the morph ball, which that again is iffy. I found a lot of times I was playing and I was accidentally going into morph ball mode when I didn't want to. And the Metroid 2 remake that I recently played, like that game made some amazing additions to like the mechanics of this series. Being able to press a button and just turn into a morph ball, I mean that was an amazing change, and it made it a little hard to go back to this game with that classic morph ball changing. The X parasites in this game, basically this is kind of like a new system with this game, whereas in Super Metroid you would just find ammo and health pickups from the enemies and you'd run into them and you'd collect them. When you destroy enemies in this game, the X parasite kind of leaves their body and they kind of float around, and a lot of the times they'll actually fly away from you, and that's one of the things about the system that is frustrating. But a cool thing is that they can actually, if you don't collect them, if you're too slow, they can actually kind of create new enemies and actually revive enemies that you just killed. And I thought this was actually kind of a cool mechanic, and they make good use of it later in the game with a particular really tough enemy. So that the whole X parasite system is kind of interesting. It's got its negatives, but I think it's cool too at the same time. The final boss in this game is really strong. It's a really great final boss, and I should talk about the Samus clone that you'll kind of find throughout this game. I think it's the SAX it's called, and it's like this super strong version of Samus that kind of like roams the laboratory. And you kind of have to avoid it at first because it's so powerful and can kill you in a few hits. And the game almost becomes like a survival horror game at these moments where you kind of gotta hide from the Samus clone and make sure it doesn't spot you. And these moments are pretty tense. There's not too many of them, and there's basically scripted events, but they're pretty interesting, and I quite like them. But this Samus clone is the final boss of the game, and it's extremely challenging. And the way they've built it up throughout the game makes it really satisfying when you eventually do fight it. It's got like a lot of the same moves that you do, and it's really fun trying to kind of figure out its patterns. It does a ridiculous amount of damage, and it's easily the hardest fight in the game. But unlike a lot of the other bosses, I didn't feel like this one was cheap. It does have a second form that's pretty easy, but it also has an annoying final form called the X-Core. I'll talk about those later when I talk about the cons of this game, but the final boss is really satisfying. The whole final sequence and ending of this game I think is actually really strong, even though the second half of the game in general I think is pretty poor. But we'll talk about that later. The music and visuals are fantastic in this game. The sprite work is really good. If you're playing this on Wii U, I would recommend just playing it on the gamepad, which is basically like, it's almost like a giant GBA. Even in the pixel perfect mode on the TV, everything's too big and blown up, which makes it look too pixelated. But on a smaller screen, it looks fantastic. The music is perfectly moody and ambient, like a lot of Metroid games. It's got some music like from Super Metroid, I'm pretty sure. But the new songs were pretty good, and they added to the atmosphere of the game, even though I do think the atmosphere in this is really lacking compared to Super Metroid, because the isolation factor is just not quite there with this game. The only part of the game where I felt the atmosphere was quite good is when the Samus clone is kind of hunting you, which is those moments were always pretty good. And the game's length, it's only a 5-hour game. It took me a little over 5 hours to complete. 56% item completion, which is pretty lousy. I was actually expecting more, but overall, I think that's a good length. I think Metroid games, at least 2D Metroid games, should be around this length. I think that's kind of perfect, and it definitely fits in with like the bite-sized format of the game, and fitting on like the Game Boy Advance. But yeah, those are all the pros. Certainly a good amount of them, and overall, I do think this game is enjoyable from a gameplay standpoint. But I do got to get into the negatives here, and there's there's a few. Now, most of them are actually small complaints that didn't really bother me all that much, and some of them are definitely down to preference, but there was one major issue I have with this game. But first, we'll talk about the interruptive dialogue and all the exposition. I'll admit it wasn't really to my preference. I definitely prefer Super Metroid in that regard. But at the same time, like I said earlier, I do think it actually fits this game's narrative and what they're like. You know, they were obviously going for this style. They weren't trying to just make another Super Metroid, and I think it's fine. I don't think it's like disastrous like a lot of people do, but. Yeah, I can't say I loved the structure of this game personally. And one frustrating thing with that is the fact that there are all these locked doors that you find in this game that are locked for like these arbitrary reasons, and they constantly block your progress. And you want to explore every possible way that you can go, but there's like a very set path that the game wants you to go. And basically the way they make you adhere to this path is to have all these doors lock to make things less confusing. And honestly, that just really pissed me off. Anytime I found a locked door and I had to do like I had to get to some certain specific place or kill a specific boss or enemy to open that door, or I had to have the right power up. Like, it was just, I don't know, it was kind of annoying, honestly. I was not really a fan of that game. And I will say the linear structure of the game did make exploration a little less rewarding. There are those moments for backtracking, and those were rewarding. It's especially great when you go back to your previous area with your new abilities and you find like a new energy tank. I always love seeing those, but I do think the exploration aspect was better in Super Metroid. I enjoyed it more, even though it was far easier to get lost in that game. Now, another thing, like the life and ammo pickups flying away from you, because the X-Parasite things that like kind of fly out of enemies, like that's how you get your health and ammo in this game. And some of them fly away from you, and that honestly was really frustrating to me. But again, that's kind of a minor complaint. One sequence of the game that really pissed me off is the very last chase sequence with the Samus clone. And this, like I said before, this thing kills you in like 2 hits. And this sequence, you're getting chased by it, and you have to go into Morph Ball mode and kind of bomb these walls that keep blocking your progress. And you just can't do it fast enough. Like the clone is right on your back, and as soon as it hits you, you're basically dead. And the save point was actually pretty far from this sequence, and it was very frustrating. Like, I died a bunch on this sequence. It was one of those moments that just really stood out to me as like really awful design. That was a bit unfortunate. The backtracking in this game, I do wish there was like a little more like non-optional backtracking. I know like too much backtracking can definitely get annoying. Metroid Prime was a little harsh in this regard, especially with like the fetch quest hunt that you had to do at the end. But I do like some backtracking, and this game just didn't have enough of it for me personally. The game generally gets worse as it goes. In fact, I think this game is stronger in the first half. The level design might get a little more interesting, but the bosses get worse and worse the more you play the game. And one other minor thing is like the save points. There's like recharge points and save points. The recharge points obviously recharge your health and ammo, and the save points let you save your game. I wish that they were combined into one, and this is something the Metroid 2 remake did. I'm not sure if Zero Mission does this, or what Metroid game started this, but I think it's actually a great addition. And having those two things be separate was just, I don't know, it was annoying to me. It maybe would make the game a little bit easier, but the difficulty on this game is weird, where the actual levels are fairly easy. It's actually a pretty easy game for the most part. But the bosses, in the first half, the bosses are fine. They're not too bad. But in the second half, they get fucking ridiculous. And this is my major complaint with this game. I think the boss battles in this game are trash. They are, for the most part, horrible. I'd say maybe 75 to 80% of the bosses in this game I hated. And it's kind of shocking, actually. And the Metroid series is, I'll admit, it's not been an amazing series for bosses. Metroid 2 Remake had all the Metroid bosses, which were terrible. Super Metroid had a few I remember that were kind of annoying. But most of the bosses I liked in that game. Metroid Prime, I liked most of them. Metroid Prime 2 had some of the worst bosses I've seen in a video game, and this game's got some of the worst bosses I've seen in a video game, and it's ridiculous. I'll definitely give a few examples. Most of them are honestly just cheap and take way too many hits to kill. And a lot of them have like really erratic movement patterns and like really hard to dodge attacks and move at a speed that is just too hard to avoid with your character, with how much of the screen that they take up and you take up. And a lot of them have like these really small weak points that are very hard to hit, especially if you have to aim diagonally to attack some of these weak points. So let's talk about some of the horrendous bosses in this game. The first boss is like this snake boss you come across, and there's platforms that you have to jump to because there's water beneath the platforms, and you move really slow in water. And this snake boss just moves super fast around this arena in this pattern that has like there's no pattern to it. He just kind of comes on the screen from any direction he feels like, and if he hits you, he's going to knock you off into the water. And it's so frustrating trying to dodge this thing. So what I had to do, it basically became a battle of attrition, and a lot of the boss battles in this game become battles of attrition, where I had to stay in the water and hoped that he would come out from the ground in front of me, and I could, shoot a few beam shots at his head, because you could only hit his head. The rest of him was invulnerable. So this boss was extremely frustrating. I hated it. Another annoying boss is like the security robot boss, and you have to fight this thing twice, and both times are annoying as fuck. This second time, you have to use a power bomb to blow up like a top part of the arena to have like this rail that you can kind of travel on. Like you kind of go left to right on this rail, and the boss is at the bottom with like this water that's kind of like electrified, so you can't stay on the ground too much. You constantly get hit. But staying on the top part, it's easy to get hit as well because he jumps around a lot. And anytime he jumps and hits you, you fall down back into the water and get hit again. And he keeps shooting these missiles at you that you have to keep shooting. And it's easy to accidentally do diagonal shots, and so you end up missing and getting hit again, and thus falling off. And you have to be climbing this thing because you have to aim your missiles directly below and hit his weak point, and it's only vulnerable during certain points. When he's attacking you with his missiles, you can't hit him, like, at all. So this fight was the most frustrating fucking thing ever. Like, you're just struggling with the controls the entire time. He takes like 30 missiles to kill, and it's just all this damage that you can't possibly avoid. So yeah, another horrendous boss. But another annoying boss is the spider boss, where the trek to him is really annoying. You have to go through all like these vents in morph ball mode, and it's just really slow and takes forever. I really wish the save point was closer to it, but this spider basically just bounces around the room and trying to hit you. And it took me a while to learn what I had to do, because I was finding it so hard to avoid not getting hit by him because he was just so fast. But it turns out you could just morph ball into one of the corners and he would never hit you. But he was annoying too, because he would open up like his mouth and you had to like shoot missiles up at him. But again, it was way too easy to accidentally shoot diagonals, and then you would completely miss him. And then he had a second form where he just bounces around the room even faster, and you have to basically spam missiles and hope you kill him before he takes out all your health. So that was annoying as well. There's another boss called Nightmare, which apparently is an infamous boss. I didn't know when I was fighting him that he's like considered the hardest boss in the game. But he's like this big like mech type thing. You have to kind of stand underneath him and shoot missiles diagonally at him. Very hard to hit him. He has a bunch of attacks that are extremely hard to dodge. And then later he kind of goes all around the room in these very erratic patterns. You got to use the space jump to jump over him, and the timing on that in this game is quite strict, so it's hard to get down, so you're going to get hit by him a lot. And he takes a ridiculous amount of damage. Like, it was unbelievable how many shots I had to put into this guy to take him down. Really, that was a really frustrating boss too. But yeah, it's like the bosses in this game. I'm sorry, like I think they're horribly designed. Like, they're just not fun to fight. They're battles of attrition, and the worst part of them is the fact that every single boss has an X-Core phase, where basically it's like this giant core with a parasite in it that kind of goes around the room, and you have to shoot a missile at it, and then it has like an invulnerability period, and then you got to shoot another, and every single boss ends with this. And a lot of these bosses are so hard that by the time you get to this phase, you're most likely not going to have a whole lot of health. And if you make the smallest mistake, especially with the X-cores that have these eyeballs that you have to hit, and they're quite annoying to hit, and then they shoot you at the same time. They shoot these beam attacks. If you have not a lot of health and those things hit you, you'll die, and you'll have to do the entire boss again. And it's so frustrating to do a lot of these bosses, and this is the worst in the final boss, where, you know, the damage output is insane. I died like 20 plus times on the final boss, and I'd say around 15 of those 20 times I died at the core because I would get to it with no health, and I just couldn't possibly kill it without taking damage, because it took quite a few hits, and it was like shooting these beams at me. And it just gets so tedious to fight these things. You have to fight so many of them. It really started to piss me off. You know, every time I would fight a hard boss, just to die at this stupid thing. And you can shoot at it to make those like health parasites kind of come out of it, but then they start flying around the arena like away from you, and then you're trying to gather the health, and this X-core thing is trying to hit you or shoot bullets at you. It's just really frustrating. It's by far the worst part of the game, like the bosses in combination with these X-cores. But yeah, you would think, you know, I've been so negative about these bosses, you would think they would like almost ruin the game for me, but they didn't. I still did enjoy this game for the most part, but I don't know, it's not one of my favorite Metroid games, that's for sure. I think out of all the Metroid games, Metroid Prime 2 is probably the only one I liked less than this, and that's only because mostly because like the Dark World stuff and the fetch quest, and the fact that the Spider Guardian is probably the worst boss I've ever seen in a video game. None of the bosses in this got that bad, but it's definitely my least favorite of the 2D Metroid games I've played so far, but I still think it's worth playing. I still think it's worth checking out, especially if you're a fan of the series and you haven't played it yet. I think it might also be a good game to start with, because of the whole guided nature of it. But yeah, I didn't expect to be talking almost near 30 minutes about this game, but I don't know, I guess with the Metroid series there's a lot I can talk about. I guess I just really like the series that much. But yeah, have you guys played Metroid Fusion? What did you think of it? And thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.